So now that we have the basics of vertically lengthening in a sitting position, we're gonna just take a think about what I said earlier about the knee being below the hip. So if I just look at chair height alone, this is a simple tool to be able to make it the easiest for your body to attain its positional least stress. So in this particular chair, for my height, the knee is about the same as the hip, not maybe a little lower, but not much. So I like to use this in order to get my knee a little bit lower than my hip. And what that does is makes it easier for me to make these adjustments to my pelvis and my back to find its neutral position. Now, this also affects the hip. So if I have the hip itself has its own positional least stress, right? So if the hip is bent up far this way, it's gonna be in its end range position and not be in too much stress. And so we want to open it up to be in its positional least stress, which then allows us to hold our backs in a positional least stress. So if I have the knee at the level of the hip, it's going to be like this. If I have the knee above the hip, it's going to be like this. But right now I have the knee below the hip, and it's going to be like this, which gives me more freedom of motion of my pelvis, so I can control that. So just by making that adjustment to whatever you're sitting in, then that can just set you up for success above, everything above. So to just demonstrate that in exaggeration, if I sit in a very low chair, so in this position, my hip is really up here. And so this is going to depend on how flexible I am, right? So if my hips are very flexible, then this might not be totally their end range and I can still make adjustments to my pelvis. But if my hip is stiff, it's going to not allow me to do that and pull my back down, pull me around, which then in turn affects the rest of my body because I no longer can keep this in its ideal position if I can't keep the bottom half in its ideal position. So, and at the very least, this is a lot of work to stay up to keep my back in a nice position and not comfortable and compressive on my hip structures. And the muscles in my back have to work way too hard to stay up like this. So that's just a little understanding of why that hip above the knee positioning is so useful.